and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big close out the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bought your great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at you, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby you made me $1 billion, plus I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna do my little intro, and then we'll get this party started.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, it's great having you on.
You're live.
Hey everybody, welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host Chris J. Here on Sunday night. I have a guest, Scott Rickard, who is a commentator for multiple different media sources, including RT and Press TV. So if you are big into alternative media, you might have seen him somewhere. Tonight we are going to be talking about a few different subjects, and as I always do in my format, is that it might not be limited to these couple subjects, but this is what we're going to highlight is Syria and the current situation that's going on there, and also the Russia-United States relations. But we're going to talk about the big question mark that everyone has been thinking about, especially after now one full week at work of President Trump, is what will Trump's role in the Syrian civil war be, and will Trump actually make good on his promise to improve relations with Vladimir Putin and Russia? And to me, it seems to be a very big enigma, because you have President Trump who is talking tough on Iran, and it's continued into this presidency. As we've seen, the rhetoric continued. Apparently, he called the king of Saudi Arabia. I was about to say the president of Saudi Arabia. They definitely don't have a president. They have a king, that's for sure. And I heard that they were still talking. They were talking about Iran pretty much continuing the same line that was in the last administration, perhaps even a tougher line, which is that Iran is a major supporter of terrorism and that Iran is a threat to the Middle East. I also saw that Trump is going to be having Netanyahu over, or is it the other way around? Is he going to see that? No, I think it's Netanyahu's coming to D.C. And of course, Netanyahu's line throughout all of this is that Iran should face a preemptive strike of some sort, and they've been pretty much egging the United States on to enter the war, or their proposed war with Iran, for how many years now? And it's been Netanyahu who's been saying since the 90s that they are 6 months away from a nuclear weapon, which has been it's been debunked multiple times. I mean, the media has been saying this since the 1980s, that Iran is so close to building this nuclear weapon that apparently is never going to be built, because if they do have it, they don't know about it, because they would have definitely said they had it, because they want any excuse to go in there. But Iran does not appear to have this weapon, this fictional weapon that they keep talking about. And Syria, how this all ties back into Syria, is that Syria is the gateway to Iran. And this is how I've said for a long time, is that if they ever go to war with Iran, it's not going to be a direct invasion. I think it's going to be first they're going to enter Syria, and they're going to get tied into a conflict with Iran in Syria, which will lead to a secondary war in Iran becoming the main showdown between U.S.-Israeli, coalition forces and whoever comes to the aid of Iran. Scott, what do you make of Trump's what seems to be a double standard? Is that I like Russia, I like Vladimir Putin, but I don't like their allies so much. He seems to have a very tough stance when it comes to Iran. Also, some of the other allies, they're maybe not as important, but still kind of do have some importance, like Venezuela, that he talked pretty tough about on the campaign trail. So what's your take on all that?
Well, my take with Trump is obviously he's very impulsive. He has a hidden agenda that's very closely tied to his colleagues that he owes favors to and he's friendly with. This is a guy who grew up in New York, has very close ties to the New York mafias, the Purple Gang guys who were after obviously Joe Kennedy and the Italian mafia. Those guys never went away. Obviously, their children picked up where their fathers and grandfathers left off, and certainly Trump as our new real estate mobster in chief, has incredibly good ties in New York City and New Jersey, and those ties go a long way back. And the mafia has been very closely tied to the U.S. government, especially after World War II. They were very closely tied into the intelligence community and very closely tied into a lot of the global drug trade. So, Trump's going to pick right off where everybody else is started. And I think the difference between, say, Trump and, say, Obama or even Clinton or even the son, George Bush, these are individuals who were quite a bit more naive than Trump when it comes to some of the inner workings of the sort of dark side of government characters. So this is a guy who's got a lot of people that he's going to allow to influence his relationships. Now, that being said, obviously, there are plenty of individuals who do not want to see I guess, an adversarial relationship with Russia for many different reasons. These reasons are obviously commercial with petroleum interests, certainly commercial with drug interdiction interests. If you look at the mobsters in Russia who are obviously working alongside mobsters in the United States and certainly elsewhere in Greece and Cyprus and Italy, there's a lot of long-standing relationships and a lot of drug trade relationships that will continue. And as these continue, some of the, I guess, as you mentioned it, neocon and anti-Russian rhetoric and certainly mind control, brainwashing that we've all been taught, as children, our parents and our grandparents were also very indoctrinated as well through media post the World War II initiatives when, you had quite a bit of people jumping on the bandwagon of this anti-communist bandwagon that really started at the point at which the British and their respective European empires were in fear of any type of uprising against their elite leaderships. They were very. They didn't want to see what happened to the czars happen across Europe and obviously into England. So at that point, if you talk to anyone who's 70s, 80s, 90s, the word that instead of Islamic terrorism that was popular to them, the word would have been Bolshevism, and then subsequently to Bolshevism would have been things like Nazis and things like Japs and those types of things. And now, obviously, the catchphrase of the day is this Muslim terrorism or Islamic terrorism. So that's our new boogeyman that we're all supposed to fear, and that's the one that's coming to get us at night when we sleep. And now, the easing of relations is possible, I believe, with Russia. But as you said, there's a lot of opportunity for Russia to, I would say, at least bring some reality to what's going on in Iran. However, I believe that the Russians will look out for themselves first and probably forego their. I don't believe that they have as strong a relationship with Iran. It's obviously stronger than the West's. Iran has talked about joining the alliance between Russia, Pakistan, and China. Iran has also considered joining BRICS. But that being said, when it comes to long-standing relationships, Russia really doesn't have the longest, greatest standing relationship. Sadly, the longest relationship with Iran would have really been the British. And then, obviously, since then, since they were ousted in the 1950s and post World War II, the Americans, really set the stage for the Islamic Revolution, through our unfortunate support of the Shah of Iran. So at this point, obviously, it's a wild card that I believe that the Russians will forego, given the fact that the Americans will somehow provide some sort of reasoning to go after Iran, because I believe, as Wesley Clark said in 2007, he had 7 countries on a list that were supposed to be taken over and destroyed in 5 years. Well, 10 years later, 6 out of the 7 are destroyed, and the final one they were going to go after was Iran. And that being said, Iran is definitely on everybody's radar. And unfortunately, the military-industrial complex does not have a reverse gear. And my thoughts and prayers go out to the people of Iran, because I believe that by the end of these 4 years, there's going to be some pretty devastating destruction in that country.
You're right about there's not a long-standing relationship between Iran and Russia, and that's partially because during the time of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union backed Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war, along with the United States. But of course, there was the whole Iran-Contra scandal where we were actually selling missiles to Iran at the same time. I think that the war with Iran is inevitable, because you have some of the most powerful people in this country you're pushing for it, and you also have the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, is pushing for it, and it seems like that's a promise that every presidential candidate has to give before they, get selected. I'm not going to say elections at this point. It's a selection, and it's ultimately between the establishment players who they allow into the game. They have to tell AIPAC that no options off the table with Iran, and it seems like that's been a condition, going back to probably at least 2008 and before. That's been when it's really been on the radar. And Wesley Clark said that in 2007. And you're right. I think 6 out of the 7 have been taken out. I mean, it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Libya, Yemen, one more in there, Syria,
yeah.
and Iran. So,
Somalia,
Sudan ended up going into a civil war. They got split up. You have Yemen. They ended up going to a civil war.
Well, the difference between the 7 was Yemen and Lebanon. Yemen was actually has replaced Lebanon of the 7 that are on the list now for the current immigration ban. So, but pretty much 6 out of 7 are on the immigration ban. Yemen is basically the new player, and oddly enough, it's interesting to see that Lebanon, even though it houses the militia Hezbollah, the Americans are still very friendly with the Lebanese military. In fact, if you go to Washington, D.C. anytime, you can stay at the Sheraton right across the river in Crystal City, right across the river from the Pentagon, and you'll see many Lebanese officers there staying at that particular hotel. In fact, that's one of the main hotels they stay at when they come to visit to the United States. I've had breakfast in that hotel with many Lebanese officers that still do visits to the United States, in spite of the fact that you hear all this tremendous rhetoric about, horrifically these Hezbollah terrorists are, when in fact, it's just basically a militia, a very small militia in numbers, under 10,000, but yet it gets all of this, ridiculous press in the Western propaganda media. So when you look at things face value, Lebanon has probably much better relationships with the United States than people can imagine. And at the same time, there's many operations there with the CIA and people stationed there actually running television networks for the CIA, Iraqi television networks broadcast out of Beirut. There's all and they're run by the CIA. So it's a lot of people really don't understand how closely tied the Americans still are in Lebanon.
Yeah, Lebanon, I always found that to be weird, too, that Hezbollah can operate out of there, but at the same time that America has this pretty cozy relationship with their actual military and government, and also there's another, militia, right, which is the South Lebanon Army, which is backed by Israel, or at least they used to be there. It's that country's interesting, to say the least, and how it's set up, and that's why a lot of the Middle East is that way, that people just get lost because it's there's this group there that belongs to, or that supports these countries or supported by these countries, and this group over there supported by these countries. And that Syria has really turned into that way, that I think Americans are just lost at this point. And if the media can keep it in simplest terms possible, then they're just going to believe that side because they want to believe something they can actually wrap their minds around, even if it's totally false. Like what we've seen recently is that a congresswoman going over there and actually talking against the mainstream line about Syria. Tulsi Gabbard went over there, and she said on CNN, I was going to say she had the balls to do it, but maybe we can find a different expression for that. Tulsi Gabbard was the guts to do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's an incredible congressperson. I mean, she was speaking out against it as well. I have to say that I don't agree with all of her policies, but of the majority of our representatives in the Senate and in the House, she definitely is more outspoken and more legitimate, and has exposed a lot of the things that we know outside of American mainstream media to be true. And what's interesting is that it's indefensible, the kinds of statistics and data and really true facts that have occurred in Syria. And so I think what's happened is that the Americans were caught, red-handed there. Syria did everything correctly. Russia did everything correctly. Hezbollah did everything correctly. They've operated in a way that has been tremendously supportive to the sovereignty of Syria. Very oddball things were happening. You had, I can remember you had I think he was a Saudi national that was caught in the airport in Beirut with a bunch of amphetamines about a year or two ago. And these amphetamines were the amphetamines that they were feeding the mercenaries in Syria to basically keep them alive and turn them into these wild coyotes that would just be amped up on tremendous amphetamines and just run no holds barred into the fires of hell for absolutely no more reason than they knew no better. I mean, these are just as you described, how difficult it is for the average American to understand the intricacies of what's happening on the other side of the pond. These guys that are fighting these wars have far less understanding in their own minds of what it is. They're basically programmed machines. Some of these people have been fighting wars since they were teenagers and younger. So obviously they're going to be very, very easily turned into a direction and just pushed as if they were very simple tools. And unfortunately, The U.S. has been taking advantage of this, and it's interesting to see that you have in Syria a small country, comparatively to the rest of the world. Obviously, it was 20 some odd million strong when it was first attacked. Certainly, with all the exodus, I would assume that it's probably close to, I would say, 15 to 18 million now, with obviously a much smaller area that hasn't been destroyed, and certainly they are dependent on foreign aid in order to sustain their livelihood. This is a country that's been just decimated, and it's unfortunately sixth on the list of the countries that have been decimated over the last 10 years by the United States and their allies. So I think that, when you get a Tulsi Gabbard in there and you get somebody like that who has some credibility, now they're trying to discredit her because they're claiming that the individuals who paid for her trip were some individuals who belonged to I guess, an offshoot of Muslim Brotherhood at one point. This is a group out of Ohio. Oddly enough, I really don't care who pays for her trips. I'm more interested in what information can be gathered and shared. Very similar to, I don't care who stole the Podesta emails. I'm just happy that the information was gathered and shared.
Well, I saw that they accused her of being of going with some fascist group inside of Syria. They said that the Syrian Social Nationalist Party or something like that's the name of this little pro-Assad group inside of Syria. They said that this is some pretty much like a Nazi group that she belonged or went with, and that's who paid for her. But it's more important what Tulsi Gabbard gathered out of there, which is that one of the main assertions that's most important is that there are no moderate rebels in Syria, and this is what's been said by a lot of the world for now 3-4 years. I mean, now we're talking about a war that's been going on for almost 6 years, and this line has been repeated so many times on the TV. We're only funding the moderate rebels, but there are no moderate rebels. And what she asserted is that all the groups inside of Syria that are opposed to Assad are fighting on one side, and they're all under the command of the biggest group, which the biggest group that's in the opposition, if you look at it at a purely, the mercenaries and the terrorists versus Assad's military, would be ISIS. They're the biggest rebel force, if you want to call them that, or opposition force inside of Syria. And she also said another important thing, that one thing that the United States will deny, and I don't think they're ever going to admit to anytime soon, is that ISIS has received aid from the United States government, and so is Al-Qaeda, so is al-Nusra, and these other extremist groups. And it's been very clear to people that have looked through the alternative media and are not reliant on the mainstream media that ISIS has definitely received aid, and is definitely the big question is really to people in alternative media is whether their creation and their whole existence is not a Western creation. And at my point of view, it is. ISIS definitely it's just like many other terrorist groups inside the Middle East, is that they're tools of the United States government, Western intelligence, in order to destabilize countries over there. I mean, look at the Mujahideen. They were the first one, really, that all these other groups splintered off of. And if you look at terrorism and the concept of it, which is based in Wahhabism, the ideology, Wahhabism is a British invention in order to destabilize the Muslim world about 100 years back. And Wahhabism is what all these terrorists have one common thing, and it's this diluted, twisted version of the Quran, which really has no basis in the actual Quran. It's which pretty much says it's fine to kill non-believers and do whatever it takes in order to convert people. But at the same time, these people are, like you said, jacked up on speeds. There's many different things that are wrong with a lot of these fighters in Syria, and part of it is being brainwashed into the Wahhabist ideology, but it's also many other things. A lot of these people are just, straight out of their mind with all the different factors that are involved in that, to them giving them speeds or whatnot. And it's important that American people realize that there is no role that the United States government should take besides defeating ISIS. There should be no funding of the moderate rebels, and there should be, if anything, we should be actually helping Assad's military defeat ISIS and coordinating with them, coordinating with the Russians, and also don't forget the Iranians, who have been critical to defeating ISIS. Even Hezbollah. There's been many groups that have been helping defeat ISIS in Syria, and one of them is not the United States or any other allied country, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, all these Gulf Arab states, and Israel, a huge one. That it's obvious that Israel, they've even said that we'd rather have ISIS than Iran. I think it was one of their top government officials admitted to that, and that's definitely their MO when it comes to the future of Syria and Iran, is that they would much rather have those countries ran by extremists like Saudi Arabia, because that's what ultimately these extremists would turn that country into, a backward theocracy like Saudi Arabia, who they get along with, rather than Syria and Iran. It's a lot for the average American to process, obviously, because the average American barely have enough interest in these topics in order to actually really have much of an opinion on them. But I think a few major lies being exposed would be the first way to start in order to finally break through this iron curtain that the media has put the average American behind. This is restorative worldview. Second question that I guess I'll move on to is, what do you think Israel's role with ISIS and terrorism is? I would like to ask you that question. And also, do you think that America has much of a role in having alliances with Israel? Of course, people that listen to my show regularly know the answer to what I think about that. But I'd like to hear what's your take on the United States-Israel special relationship.
Well, unfortunately, it's Israel's relationship has been, thrust upon the West since the early 1900s with the work of the Zionists and what their involvement was with the financial communities, obviously with the elite and the wars that were conducted. Certainly the relationships at a very high levels, financially and commercially, and these relationships, obviously go back over a century. And so as these relationships evolved, and unfortunately Truman's relationship with his Zionist friend, resulted in the creation of what we call modern day Israel. And this has no relationship back to what the Bible describes as Israel. These are non-Israelites. These are individuals who are of former Soviet state and Soviet state immigrants. Many obviously are potentially descendants of Israelites, but most are certainly not descendants of the original people that lived there. That being said, obviously it doesn't give them the right to go and oppress and displace and certainly genocide the people that are there. However, unfortunately, the way that societies work, the Americans and the immigrants that came to this country obviously did that to the indigenous people that were here, and millions upon millions of indigenous North Americans, or people that lived on the continent we call North America now, were genocided. Certainly, it's a much slower genocide for the Palestinians, the Arabs culture that was occupying the land that's called Israel now today, and they have been imprisoned within their own communities. They are certainly not free in those communities. They are free to vote, but they have a very small minority vote. They are free to hold office, but they have a very small minority representation in the government there. But they are not free to move about the country. They are not free to live in a equal manner to anyone that is of a different faith. In fact, they call it a Jewish state, when in fact, if we called this a Christian state or a Christian country, obviously people would be up in arms. You see half the country obviously upset about, even current immigration policies. So, is Israel a major influence on the United States? Unfortunately, yes. But I wouldn't say it's Israel as much as it is the Zionist influence, and it goes into the Bible. The Bible was actually modified in the early 1900s by Schofield to include the Schofield Reference Bible actually includes the modifications in support of repatriating the Holy Land, Zion or Zionism associated with Israel. And that was unfortunately pushed down the throats of the Christian communities across England, the United States, and obviously other Western cultures. So this particular mentality, just as much as the Islamophobic mentality, has been pressed upon the minds of current mankind. This particular pro-Israel mentality has also been pressed upon the religious dogma of the mind. So you have, in my opinion, tremendous support for the anti-Arab rhetoric as well as the pro-Israel rhetoric. That is, if you don't go in and pledge your support to Israel, you can kiss your political career goodbye. And that's, obviously Tulsi Gabbard has also said that, Israel is a great ally, even though she also has walked the line on the Syria debacle. But at the end of the day, I've seen very few, if any, politicians who will basically stand up against the apartheid state of Israel as it exists today. And if they do make any kind of statements like that, they're almost guaranteed to lose their next election because of the tremendous amount of influence that the pro-Israel lobby and, unfortunately, the religious aspects of both the Democratic and the Republican parties. I have friends and relatives and fellow political, associates that, 9 times or at least 8 times out of 10 are going to be extremely supportive of Israel based upon, obviously what they're accustomed to hearing. That's the problem with individuals, is that if something, you said this earlier in your conversation, if something does not seem, accustomed to what that they've heard before, if something is out of the ordinary that they've heard, they become very uncomfortable with it, and they really don't want to hear about it. So if you try to explain to someone that, listen, maybe your support for Israel might be based upon, a lifetime of indoctrination, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that they've been fooled their whole life, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's called cognitive dissonance.
There's cognitive
it's a psychological term. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance, and people become uncomfortable with the fact that somebody's challenging their well-believed and well-known feelings, and so it's a very difficult nut to crack. I just don't. I've been. I think the more that I've talked about it, I think the best thing to do is just to talk about it in terms of, try to put it back in the terms of history, to where this is not a new phenomenon. This phenomenon, as I said earlier, was how they treated the Bolsheviks, who, quote unquote, were Jewish, but they were really Kazakhs that converted to Judaism because of their disdain for the Ottoman Empire and for the Russian Empire. So they chose the religion and made it an edict, and obviously the Americans and the British, and just as they supported Adolf Hitler in the war against Russia for building up the Third Reich, the Americans and the British and others also supported the Bolsheviks in the uprising to overthrow the Tsars. So, the results of those two moves are very similar to what happened in Syria. They rose up, they tried to build an infrastructure to go against Assad, and it got out of hand. And people that were obviously disenfranchised with what the United States had done in Iraq joined in on the game and started taking out all the Shia military leaders that were in the north of Iraq, and then taking over all their equipment and joining forces with the mercenaries that the Americans helped initially build in Syria. And then once it got out of hand, the Americans were allowing it to continue. And as they allowed it to continue, they were sort of, I like to use statistics. There was a point at which the coalition bombing campaign against ISIS had dropped, less than 10,000 bombs in a period of nearly almost a year. And that 10,000 bombs in a year against forces that were supposed to be, 20,000 strong. That just didn't make sense to me, because if you relate that to what the U.S. did to Milosevic, they dropped 36,000 bombs in 76 days against an 85,000 strong army, and caused obviously a surrender after 76 days. So that's the difference in mentality. In 2.5 months, they dropped obviously 3 times as many bombs as they did in the entire year against forces that were a quarter of the size of Milosevic's. So let's use math as a way to describe how deliberately negligent the U.S. military and intelligence. Plus, by the way, we have a lot better weaponry and a lot better intelligence than we ever did before. So, that's the difference. And I think that when you started looking things like more intellectually like that, it's a lot easier to prove.
Yeah, the difference between ISIS and the difference between ISIS and Milosevic is that one, they were actually trying to make surrender, and another one, they would like to keep around and use them as a tool. Or just look at what they did in Vietnam as well. Is that in wars in the past, that they've dropped so many bombs. I mean, they dropped on Vietnam more bombs than they dropped throughout the entirety of World War II on, the Vietnamese military and the Viet Cong, which wasn't really that huge of a force. And then ISIS, which is this force that's, gigantic. The estimates have them in the tens of thousands, maybe the hundreds of thousands, and they only dropped 10,000 bombs in 1 year. And you have this one incident on September 17th at Deir el-Zor, where they ended up accidentally bombing the Syrian Arab Army that was against ISIS, killing, I saw, was 106. I think that's what the Syrian government said, and RT said, I think, at one point. So that's what I'm going to go with, 106 May. The number was changed at a later time, but 100 anyway was, a significant number of Syrian soldiers were killed in the attack. And now you see that same city is falling to ISIS a few months later, which that attack definitely probably set the momentum on ISIS's side in this months-long firefight that's going on there. And if you look at this city, and you look at a map of, who controls what in Syria, it's very crucial that the Syrian Arab Army holds on to this, because it's like their only pocket of a solid control on the eastern side of Syria. Most of the eastern side of Syria still, unfortunately, is controlled by either ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Mostly just ISIS controls the eastern side of Syria. And I would think that from a strategic point of view, that it would definitely want to keep something on that side, because it would probably make a push towards Raqqa a little bit easier, which would probably be the main target. That's their next huge target after Aleppo, which is this self-proclaimed capital over there. The United States' intentions are no longer really questionable. It seems to be kind of obvious that what the United States government wants out of Syria, which is that they definitely don't want Assad to stay in power. They might act like they'll be cool with it, but they keep sabotaging his government in many ways with their military campaign over there. And Assad is one of the two countries, well, I guess it's three now, because now the Yemen is now controlled by or at least the capital of Yemen, and a lot of their population is controlled by the Houthis, who are anti-American, anti-Israel, they're anti-Western. But, the three, so that's Yemen became like a new country on that list of countries they want to take out. But Syria is in that little sphere of pro-Iranian countries, and Syria is one step to going for Iran, which is their grand prize. And that's why they want to go, part of the reason why they want to go after Syria so badly. There's also, of course, the pipeline, banking. There's many different reasons. It's not just one simple reason, and that's the complexity of it. And as well, also, that Syria is a secular Arab state, which doesn't really go along with what they want. The countries that they back are not secular states. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, many other countries over there in the Gulf states, and none of them are democracies. Even Bahrain, you look what's going on over there. They have like their top Shia opposition leader's been thrown in jail recently. That would be like the equivalent of here in the United States, Trump deciding to just arrest Warren was, Elizabeth Warren or something like that was absolutely, no charges whatsoever. I wouldn't be too sad to see that happen, but I wouldn't also be too sad to see Trump get hauled off. But that's what I'm saying. That's what the precedent would be like. If that happened over here, it'd be a huge deal over there. That's one of our allies, and no one really says anything about it. And imagine
that's a good point.
Or imagine if it happened in one of our countries that are supposedly one of our enemies. Let's say that down in Venezuela, Maduro just got sick of Capriles' shenanigans and what his side has been doing over there in Venezuela for the last few years after Chavez's death, which is, these what you could call protests, or what you could call more like color revolution, kind of sketchy, organized Arab Spring type deal, like kind of what happened over in Libya. If Maduro threw Capriles in jail, of course we'd be hearing all about it, about how much of a tyrant this guy is. But of course CNN doesn't receive money from Venezuela. They receive money from Bahrain, so that goes under the rug. The hypocrisy of the whole United States Western policy about the Middle East is so alarming once you look a little bit past what the mainstream media has to say. Do you think that Trump is going to continue our relationship with all these Gulf Arab states, the big ones, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia? That's the big one, because he had a kind of a falling out, I guess you could say, between the Saudi royalty and him during the campaign trail, or even called one of the Saudi princes the dopey Prince Alawid. I think it was directed at Alawid. So I wondered, do you think that Trump's going to continue the relationship with the Gulf Arab states?
Without a doubt. The United States and Britain have a long-standing relationship with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, obviously United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. These are just really very close relationships that have so much financial ties. They are dependent on these regions for, obviously, petroleum. They're huge purchasers of American weaponry, the military-industrial complex. There's it's as if you cannot end the arms trade business and the military-industrial complex, profitability, and expect the economy to continue. This is it is a perpetual need that these particular countries stay in line. And when you said, the fact this Elizabeth Warren example, that's a great example. Nimr al-Nimr was probably the lead Shiite cleric in Saudi Arabia. And, Saudi Arabia is predominantly Sunni, but they have quite a large Shiite population in the north and in the northwest. And here they go, and they actually executed their number one cleric at the same time, at which they canceled subsidies on petroleum. They canceled subsidies on their energy bills, and so on and so forth. So there is a huge disdain in that community for the Saudi government. There certainly isn't any kind of backlash or any kind of condemnation coming from the United States for that. And obviously, this guy did not commit any terrorism against his country, nor did he threaten it. If you look into his charges, they were pretty trumped up. And unfortunately, I believe that we have an administration that will continue the same Hippocratic very supportive of these, very oppressive regimes. And sadly, until you get a legitimate U.S. government, it will continue. And obviously, you also have to legitimize U.S. economics to get a U.S. government that's legitimate, because certainly, as you mentioned earlier, the economic aspects and the economic warfare that's being waged against other countries, as well as against citizens of our respective countries in the European Union and the United States. We are all subjected to a very huge Ponzi scheme that has been in a spiral for quite some time, since even the 70s, since the failure of the gold standard and the adoption of the petrodollar. And now here we are, so in debt that there's not enough resources to satisfy the beast.
Yeah. But the petrodollar, of course, is one of the many reasons of these wars over there in the Middle East. And yeah, I figure that Trump, especially that he has his business ventures over there, is not going to change much the relationship between the United States and those five countries over there, the Gulf Arab states. And Trump talked a lot of he talked in a way that seemed to be different than your average politician about the United States foreign policy. But of course, a lot of it was contradictory to his own statements. For example, when he talked about Libya, he said that Libya would have been a lot better if Gaddafi was still in power. And he was asked whether he had ever supported the removal of Gaddafi. And then you can see a little video of him back in March of 2011 from his office saying, how terrible Gaddafi is, and Gaddafi needs to be removed because he's killing thousands of people, pretty much just parroting what was the mainstream line on Libya in March 2011. And also another one you can see is that Trump's supposed condemnation of the invasion of Iraq, which if you actually look at, wasn't really that strong, because eventually you see on the Howard Stern show, he's just like, whatever, pretty much to it. Yeah, I guess I'm supportive of it. But really the Libya one was so evident. It's a hypocrisy there, because he obviously was in favor of that. Trump, to me, it's what it reminds me of in a way is just 8 years ago. You can look back to an example is that with Obama, was talking in a way that seemed to be somewhat different than what the neocons and what Hillary, his own party, wanted. And he was talking about how he's going to get us out of Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we ultimately ended up staying his entire administration. It seems like that's what politicians seem to do nowadays, is that they say that I'm different from the mainstream, and they get a lot of support, and then they just do what the mainstream wants them to do, what the elites want them to do. And then the real anti-establishment candidates don't really get anywhere, and they don't get media coverage. If the media and the establishment doesn't like you, they just don't give you airtime. I mean, you see what they did to Ron Paul in 2012, or what they did to a lesser-known anti-establishment candidate, Mike Gravel in 2008, who I actually have the pleasure of being friends with on Facebook. Mike Gravel, he barely got any. They made him seem like a joke, but he was, spouting out some of the hard truths when it came to Iraq and some of the other Middle Eastern adventures or misadventures that the United States has found themselves in in the last 15, 16 years, which is crazy to even be saying that. It's been almost 16 years now since the invasion of Afghanistan. Will be 14 years this year of the invasion of Iraq for the second time. 26 years since the Gulf War and the first invasion of Iraq. That's how long we've been messing around over there, and it's going to continue. We're in a state of perpetual war at this point, and to believe that we'll ever be at peace again will be naive. All throughout the 90s, I mean, even with Clinton, which it might not be so evident when you look at the face value, but of course 1999 happened, and the horrible participation of what happened over there in Serbia and Kosovo, and what was one of the most horrific examples of, I would say, what happens in the Middle East all the time came to Europe. It's a little bit of a precursor of what could happen if a United States-Russia showdown happens. That would be all of Europe look like what happened to those countries over there. I want to ask is what your take on. Do you think that the Syrian rebel program will end with Trump? Do you think that's going to be one thing he'll be able to successfully do, is the ceasing of all arming, training, or whatnot of the Syrian rebels, like he promised in his campaign?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that they need to arm the Syrian rebels any longer. They've already replaced the Syrian military, I guess mercenary military that they built with the YPG and the PKK. The U.S. has invested anywhere from at least $400 to $500 million in these Kurdish military operations, and these alongside the KRG, the Kurdish Regional Government in northern Iraq, are the three closest allies to the United States now in the region. That being said, obviously Turkey is a close ally, but Turkey has shown a lot of favor for the first time in modern history to Russia. Obviously the Russians and the Turks have had some pretty hairy times here recently, with the Turks shooting down Russian aircraft, the Russians bombing illegal oil going into Turkey, using thousands of tankers that were destroyed, that, by the way, were allowed to persist on a regular basis for over, several years. And the U.S. never bombed those convoys because they were obviously helping, quote unquote, ISIS rather than curbing ISIS. They were, I would call it, more like coddling. So the Russians came in and obviously, dealt a pretty strong hand to the Americans and the Turks. The Turks certainly responded in kind with their shooting down of Russian aircraft. They came to an agreement, and then last July, you had Erdogan's removal was being orchestrated by the United States, and their plan to replace Erdogan in Turkey, when in fact that failed because the Russians tipped off Erdogan and saved his life. Now Erdogan is indebted to the Russians. So the new superpowers for the United States in the region have actually turned out to be the Kurds. If you watch the rhetoric in the news coming out of the propaganda media in the United States, the Kurds seem to be getting the high sign for the next role to play here as the liberators of that region. So I don't think that you're going to see anything associated with ISIS, but I think you're going to see a massive amount of buildup of the Kurdish regional government, and of the now that Mosul is being cleared out, and also the cleanup of the north, eastern part of Syria. El Hasaka region will probably be in dispute in some peace talks between the Syrians, the Russians, and the Turks alongside the United States, because that is a region in which the U.S. Has been very instrumental in helping out the PKK and the YPG, and obviously $400 million goes a really long way with an army in that region, given the fact that these people are living in mud and brick adobes. So we don't. We won't hear anything more, I don't think, about supplying and dropping and ignoring rebel activities. But I will say that you will see some support coming out of the U.S. and their allies for these Kurdish forces that will become more instrumental in the region.
Well, that seems like it's going to get tricky because the Russians have shown their support for these same Kurdish groups, haven't they?
They have, but the Americans won their relationship. The Kurds have chosen, and they've chosen the Americans over the Russians. And the reason is because the Russians are, showing closer faith to the Turks, and both the YPG and the PKK are enemies of the of Erdogan in Turkey.
Yeah, it's interesting because at one point also the Kurdish seemed to have like a somewhat alliance, I guess, or at least a ceasefire, de facto ceasefire with the Assad military, and especially during the height of the ISIS siege on Kurdistan, which was about 2014, when the Battle of Kobani happened and whatnot. So it's interesting to see things flip around, and now that the Russians seem to have, at least for now, cozied up with Erdogan, and the PKK, the YPG now starting to cozy up with the United States. Definitely a change of events that somewhat happened over there in Syria. Syria's definitely the ultimate outcome seems to be definitely unclear at this point. Syria's now been 60 years of civil war, and hundreds of thousands have lost their lives because of this terrible civil war. Aleppo has finally been liberated, and Damascus still remains under government control, but you still have big cities such as Palmyra, Raqqa, and a few other big cities that still belong to the Syrian rebels, or you could say the American Western-backed rebels, because these people, a lot of them aren't even Syrian. They're Chechen, many different countries, Chechen, Libyan, Egyptian, practically every country Saudi. You can think of over in that region more.
Many Saudis, yeah. There's Pakistanis,
unfortunately,
Saudis.
Unfortunately, even some Palestinians have been tricked into fighting with some of these Salafist forces, and I blame the Al Jazeera, media like that comes from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and whatnot, because it's heavy brainwashing.
It sure is.
Brainwashed into believing that the Assad regime is somehow some pseudo-Zionist regime that's secretly working with Israel, and this is some kind of fight similar to their own back home, when it's completely the opposite. These are ultimately Zionist-backed death squads that they're getting themselves into, and they're helping do Israel's bidding in Syria by joining these forces. But in their own minds, and by what Al Jazeera and other Arabic, Western or Gulf Arab states medias have told them, is that they've told them that pretty much that the Assad military is somehow connected to Israel, which is laughable, really, in a way, when you look at the long-standing tension that's existed between Assad and Israel, and even his father and Israel. And they tried this before. Back in around 82, Assad had a massive uprising come from the Muslim Brotherhood against him, which that uprising from the Muslim Brotherhood kind of shows that throughout the years, the Western governments of the United States, UK, has used the Muslim Brotherhood as a tool, and even in 2012, when Mohammed Morsi took power, what we really saw was the Muslim Brotherhood taking power. There was not a resistance toppling a pro-American regime, but a pro-American regime being replaced by another pro-American regime. And now, I wonder what's your take on over there in Egypt. Do you think that Sisi is just another pro-American tool, or do you think that he's just going to stay on the fence and kind of play both sides, and he's going to be one day pro-Russian, one day pro-American, or really not even take a side and just enjoy the support from both countries?
Well, El Sisi's, obviously he's a different character than Morsi. El Sisi goes back. He's been a command general staff with the United States military. He's trained in the United States. This guy's been around in the military for quite some time. And this is what the U.S. and U.K. have done. In Egypt, they actually did in Libya up until 1969. They basically would take, military forces from the respective countries, bring them into NATO operations, bring them into the Marshall Center up in Germany and train them, bring them to the United States to naval postgraduate schools, different military command and control type of training. So these are individuals who have, extremely close Western military ties. Obviously there's military attaché from the United States, from the United Kingdom, and the NATO allies that live and work and have very close family relationships between the Egyptian military and government and intelligence community. There's, obviously at one given point, a lot of these students, because of who their parents are, go to the same schools, and some of these students even fall in love and get married. So there's very close ties that under the cover that the intelligence community knows very well. And they know how to take advantage of these, and they go so far as to, let's say, one of the leaders of a specific division or a specific directorate within the government or military sends their son or daughter, to the United States to go to school in the United States. They will find someone, recruit someone at that school, have that someone who has built a relationship with one of these students. Befriend them, become long-term friends with them, and then, 20, 30 years later, they're still friends. And, and one is maybe overtly or covertly working for the CIA. And, the person that they met in college may or may not be aware of either whether they're associated with the CIA or not. So that's the kind of intricacies that are involved in Egypt that you won't see in a Syria, that you won't see obviously in Iran, because of the Iran became very wise to Western operations after Mossadegh and after the Shah. So once the Iranians did finally get their sovereignty in the late 70s, they've been very careful about not allowing infiltration of Western, intelligence. And then obviously other countries that are in such shambles now, like Libya, obviously there's no saving a country like that at this point. It actually, the chaos that ensued post the destruction of Libya.
Well, Libya is now a failed state. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and that's by design.
Sad what happened to
Libya. Yeah, that's by design.
Sad what happened to Libya.
It really is.
Now they have ISIS running around the country. We have these two different governments fighting it out, and ultimately both not great for the people of Libya. And you have what's really sad is it's like practically the place has turned into like a Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome. You have one town being controlled by one militia. You got another militia controlling another town, and the people there have very limited mobility of where they can go. The people that live there, and though I did see one.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear. Is that what you see in the news versus? I was a Libyan linguist when I was working in the military, and I'll be very clear about when you talk about Libya. There's really when you Tripoli versus Benghazi versus Sirte, geography means everything, and obviously Tripoli has a lot better, security. I wouldn't want to go there. Don't get me wrong, but they're also very pro-American. The current mayor of Tripoli, I think he may still be mayor. Let me look it up. His name is Mahdi el-Harati. Mahdi el-Harati is a very key character in the CIA sort of overthrow, MI6 CIA overthrow, and NATO overthrow of Gaddafi. Mahdi el-Harati was paid $500,000 to take over. He was a 20-year veteran, dual citizenship. I think it was Irish and Libyan citizenship, and supposedly he was the mayor of Tripoli. He may be out now. He was out as of 2015. Unfortunately, but he was made mayor of Tripoli. Prior to that, he helped get rid of some of the rogue mercenaries that went into bordering Libya to these. When you look at Mali, and these actual mercenaries went, through Algeria into Mali and started messing with uranium mines that were owned by the French. And they sent in Mahdi el-Arati, with a bunch of mercenaries to get rid of the mercenaries that had gone rogue after they'd overthrown Gaddafi. The same thing, Mahdi el-Arati was also involved in helping to train mercenaries in Syria prior to him becoming mayor in Tripoli. Now, it looks like he, according to this information I'm looking at now, he was only a mayor in Tripoli for about a year. But at the end of the day, when they say all hell is broken loose in Libya, there are certain areas that are more secure than others. It's not completely controlled by ISIS, as you see in the news. And there's certainly, a bunch of militants running around with guns and obviously, abusing individuals that they come across. But there's also people that are very capable of defending themselves, and they don't go anywhere near. Just like, there's neighborhoods that you and I won't go to around here at night by ourselves in the Tampa area. There's areas where these people will not go at night, and vice versa. They know better than to go into Pasco County and try to knock on somebody's door and break in, because they'll get shot. So, there's that's the idea, is that as much as you see in the news, obviously it is a failed state. I agree with you 100% on that, but it's only failed because of American and NATO foreign policy, and sadly the Chinese and the Russians were fooled into the same false media that was being fed to the Americans and the Europeans around Gaddafi killing his own people. For God's sakes, he wasn't killing his own people. He was defending his people against an insurgency that was backed by Western intelligence. So, this is a long-standing, I guess.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that perhaps the ISIS controlled most of Libya. In fact, they only control a small portion.
That's exactly right.
Themselves.
Just really around.
They control by. It's only by Sirte they control to this day. They did control at one point a larger territory, but a lot of different groups control different areas of Libya. Like Tripoli is pretty much by the government there. One at Tobruk. There's two different governments. They're vying for power right now. And yes, it's 100% because of the NATO intervention is why that country's failed, because everything worked, generally fine for 42 years under Gaddafi. They didn't have much problems with violence inside the country. And inside the country, they had massive growth of human development. Their human development index was, the second highest in Africa. And they were considered at one point the richest country in Africa. Gaddafi made that country from a pretty poor third world country, not really distinguishable from other third world countries, to a very decent country to live in, in comparison to a lot of the other African countries and their neighbors.
It had the same standard of living as Russia. So
Gaddafi did huge leaps for his people there. And, that's why the speech where he talks about, pretty much what else can I give you is pretty much what that speech, his last speech that he gave, wondering why so many of his people betrayed him. And it was a betrayal for a lot, but it was also because of, I would say, spin doctors, propagandists, and also the same kind of tools that they use in Syria, is that at a certain point, unfortunately, for a lot of people, I say in the Middle East, is that if you can somehow put it into their minds that whatever cause that you're trying to get them to do is part of some kind of jihad or whatnot, they might jump aboard with it. And
well,
I
think about it this way. put yourself in their shoes and look at Hillary Clinton's dynasty and how we had a disdain for that, and it was nowhere near as despotic of a leadership and totalitarian, but what we all would have been cheering if someone came over here and helped us oust Hillary Clinton in the event that a foreign intervention came in and helped us. So obviously, yes, he was good for the development of a country. Did he do it in a way that was probably the most kind and thoughtful? Absolutely not. But was he more I guess of a provider and a builder that the country had ever seen? Absolutely. This is a man who created more prosperity in Africa than any other Arab in the history of Africa. So from that perspective, there were a lot of people that wish he was back. But from the perspective of when he was being overthrown, when people saw the opportunity, they said, well, they could be better. We could have a better, more open country. And these are people, who didn't really know what democracy was and didn't really understand that, they'd be joining, the forces of a tremendous imperialistic West. And opviously, the West doesn't care about them because certainly as soon as they were done with Gaddafi, they dropped all their operations and moved everything over to Syria. And, mission accomplished. Let's go to Syria now. And so, obviously the U.S. wasn't looking out for the best interest of the Libyans. They were looking out for the best interest of the elite, the oligarchs, petroleum masters, the finance masters, to say, okay, one economy down, well, a couple more to go here. Let's take out Syria, because if we take out Syria first, then we can go in and take out, because obviously if they can get rid of Syria, when the Russians aren't going to say anything, they can go after Iran. Obviously that was a good test to see, hey, is Russia really going to go after us or not? And Russia didn't. It was a good test. Russia didn't go after. And was Israel involved? Oh my God, Israel's bombed Syria a dozen or more times in the last 2 or 3 years, and Syria hasn't retaliated once. So you look at these bombing after bombing. These are planes coming in and bombing Syrian territory, and this is the kind of thing that if it happened anywhere else, it wasn't Israel, it would be considered international news. But it's just kind of, oh yeah, that's just Israel bombing Syria again. Just kind of oh, that's just how it is in that region, and we just accept it. It's a different mentality that people have been basically made accustomed to. It's what we all think is that's okay. That's what Israel needs to do to protect its sovereignty, and it's not. It's not okay for another country, and I think that what we'll see now is the Russians and the Americans will probably work alongside each other to make some kind of peace in Syria, but it won't be long-lived, and the Americans will be wildly successful at going after Iran, and that's sad. I mean, it's a sad history to watch unfold.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that any kind of any kind of compromise that the Russians and the Americans would come to would last for very long, because they're just worlds apart when it comes to what they want for Syria, and is that there is no, in the eyes of Washington D.C., there's no picture where Assad's in there in 5 more years. But the Russians, of course, they want to keep Assad in charge for many different reasons, and they also think it would be the best thing for Syria. And we only have a little bit of opposition to the neocon plan for Syria, the Wesley Clark, and what his plan was for the 7 countries in 5 years. Generally, that's supported by both sides, or both sides of the game over here in the United States, which, the Democrats and Republicans. But I almost laugh at the concept that these are so wildly different parties that are clashing at each other, when in reality they seem to agree on everything that matters. NATO to wars over there in those different countries to NSA spying on Americans. All that they seem to agree on, but they'll clash at each other for 2 years about transgender bathroom rights or whatnot, and that's all you'll hear on the media. I mean, it seems like every time that an issue like that starts getting brought about on the media, I go on RT like, oh, 76 killed by Israeli forces in Damascus. I'm like, oh, okay, that's the news that they're trying to distract us from. And then go like potential coup plot thwarted in Bolivia today. And it's like, oh, okay. And then there's more news that they're obviously trying to then go back on the TV, and then we got the angry conservative guy, and you got an angry liberal woman, and they're clashing each other about the transgender bathroom rights. They're going at each other. It'll be an argument for a solid 30 minutes. Just looks like reality TV at this point. That's what CNN, Fox. Fox, though, I see they all have the similar game that they'll play too. Is like Fox, they'll bring that sort of racist guy on there that says he's not racist, but and then they'll have like their token liberal somewhere over there, trying to counter what he's saying, and it just ends up being the total circus. And that's all three of our networks seem to play that game, and it's ultimately the tools of what they are is that they're weapons of mass destruction. The media, they're weapons of this mass destruction against the mind, and they have people all caught up in the two-party paradigm, ignoring the real issues. And it's caused a very divided country too. At the same point, which is very crucial to their control over us, is having us divided while at the same time we're united, or Americans are united in supporting or not knowing about the things that matter.
Right.
That's very evident right now with Trump's election. You see one side of the country seems to be so outraged. They're going as far as to even rioting over in Washington, D.C., and then you have the other side that seems to be elated right now. Nothing Trump can do could be wrong. America's so great. America's already being fixed overnight. I mean, I see people just talking that way, making it seem like we're saved. We're in the clear. All that horrible stuff with the Obama-Bush administration doesn't matter anymore because we got Trump in there and he's going to fix everything. Which you ask those people over there in Yemen what they think about that. They've already been drone striked in the Trump administration. It's continuing. The Bush drone strikes, the Obama drone strikes. And also this phone call or radio show, whatever you're typing over there, people are listening to the show, and if you're browsing the internet, if you're on a phone call, it's all going back to the NSA still. It's not like that's ending anytime soon. So a lot of the stuff that matters is going to continue to the Trump administration, and Trump has not a different opinion on that. But I want to hear, I know this was not really it's somewhat part of it because it's Russia-U.S. relations. What do you think is going to happen with Snowden now that potentially Russia and America might come to some kind of friendly status? Do you think that one of the things that Russia will have to give up in order for America to have somewhat of a friendly dialogue with them is Snowden?
Well, this would be a huge sort of feather in Rex Tillerson and Donald Trump's hat, and I think it'd be a feather that, obviously Russia would be happy to give. Certainly, they don't have to extend his asylum any longer, and they certainly don't have to give him free pass to leave the country. And I think that it's in due time. Obviously, Donald Trump could basically negotiate the extradition of Edward Snowden. So that being said, is Snowden important to Russia from their perspective? Probably not. I mean, the things that he's basically shared with people are things that a lot of the intelligence community around the world is very much aware of. You don't have to go very far to understand, the technology that's available to the intelligence community to see, how prevalent it is. All of the different companies out there like Verint that are, being used to record this phone conversation on Microsoft's Skype network. These calls are recorded even at the point at which they're not using traditional communication platforms, using things like Glimmerglass platform that basically records all the fiber communications. There's a reason that they build these giant storage infrastructures around the world, and it's because obviously you need to store a lot of recorded data. And it's not because they're monitoring it all, but if they say, hey, there was somebody that was involved in this particular, act that was very detrimental to national security. They say, oh, really? I says, well, what's he been doing lately? And they go and they take a look at all of the communications of that individual, and obviously they can do a lot of historical analysis of what that individual has been up to. Now, that being said, if the individual is on somebody's radar screen, which, I would like to think that I was on people's radar screen, because then we certainly would have at least some CIA operatives or NSA operatives that were learning something. But at the end of the day, they just don't have time to keep track of all people like me. But I will say this, the briefing that Donald Trump and Obama got, 2 weeks ago on the 13th of Friday the 13th, when they told them about the Russian involvement supposedly with U.S. elections and propaganda. One of the shows that I was on, about a quarter of the programs out of Russia, called Truth Seeker by Daniel Buchel, was actually specifically named in the intelligence report that was given to Obama and to Donald Trump. So, that show in particular, I appeared on 25% of those shows. So I would imagine if the CIA is writing a report and giving it to an outgoing and an incoming president, and it names a program that I was on, 25% of the programs, I would imagine that I'm on somebody's radar screen. And I sat at a good friend's house about 5 years ago, and actually 4.5 years ago, and he was responsible for directing ground forces to find Saddam Hussein. He received the Civilian Intelligence Medal from the CIA, and he was in the SIGINT division. And he told me, he said, Scott, he says, there's a file on you. They got caseworkers looking at what you do. And so that was, in 2012. So nobody's come knocking on my door, and certainly nobody's, they don't have to, because they pretty much have access to all my financial transactions. They have access to all my communications, and they have access to every, anything that they need, from any kind of asset or any kind of interface that I have. And I kind of think that they go, well, this is as as intricate as it is going to get, with a guy that at least was trying to get the word out about what things are up to. Because certainly I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not stealing anything from anybody. And the information that we talked about on the show today it's certainly not anything that is threatening national security. The fact is what it is that we're trying to let people know that there is a different alternative opinion out there that they have been deliberately steered away from because of the tremendous influence that the State Department, the intelligence community, and certainly the I would say the elite have on our mindset, our media, our education. So I think at the end of the day, is there something that is going to be different about this administration and how they deal with us? I think it's going to be potentially maybe individuals that do this kind of thing may come under more heavy fire. They might not like this. This might be something that's getting under people's skin, and at one point they may say, we're gonna at least knock people around and make them know that this is not acceptable. And they might get a little more serious about it and get a little rougher on the people that are speaking out against the criminal nature. Because now, I would say.
Well, what
that,
I've theorized is that the next step's going to be is maybe harassment via your place of employment or something like that. Is that for people
that's already
that
being done.
Yeah,
yeah,
stuff like that. They'll make it almost impossible for people that are very active online or whatnot. Yeah, and you actually has already started, because a lot of employers make you give up your Facebook password or whatnot, or at least they need to know where your Facebook page is. They'll ask they'll vet you via your Facebook, and if you're talking about stuff like what we will, they're very unlikely to hire you. So yeah, it's already started. You're right.
Well, when I signed up for a job with the transition team for Donald Trump, and I signed up for jobs within the thousands of jobs that the president's allowed to hire, I noticed a real heavy increase in the traffic I was getting on some pages that never get any traffic on Facebook. And these were getting dozens of hits, and I was like, "Look at this! I'm getting dozens of hits on these pages." And it just happened to coincide with application that I made to work in Donald Trump's administration. So, I would assume, obviously I didn't get a call, but I would assume that people, had to do their jobs, and when they did, they went, "Holy mother of Jesus! Look at this guy." So, and good, I mean. I'm at least that's the minimal impact I can have now, and until the Chris the Scotts and the Chris's of the world have better access to better audiences, this is the best that we're going to be able to get for now. And believe me, that our access has actually been restricted and limited since 3 or 4 years ago. With the advent of algorithms that basically control our Google searches, that can control our news feeds on our Twitter and our Facebook. I don't know if you're familiar with EdgeRank and the way that those algorithms, if you had a page in Facebook that was getting, tens of thousands of hits in the past, you would find those pages getting hundreds of hits, if maybe under, maybe a couple thousand. And the reason is because once EdgeRank was implemented, it basically limited the distribution of your posts in a way that they became, they made Facebook more of small little echo chambers between people that communicate more normally with each other. And that was by design, based upon research that was done by Sandia Laboratories for Facebook to develop a way to throttle communications on there. And then Facebook turned it into commercial product, whereby if we want to get our pages out there, we can obviously pay for sponsorship, which is monetization of the communications network that they built.
Yeah, Facebook, it's obvious that they go very far in order to make Facebook favorable to their agenda. I mean, you see what happens is that pages a lot of times get deleted or whatnot, especially I've noticed that like pro-Palestinian pages and stuff like that, they eventually, Facebook report them for, say that they put something hateful on their page or whatnot. They didn't put anything hateful on their page. Or, the people, the internet agents, you could call them Hasbro, they'll go around on the internet and they'll report pages, pro-Palestinian pages or anti-Zionist pages, and then they'll say they're hateful, and Facebook a lot of times approves their request. And Israel has been known to have a giant Hasbro force, which means information or what they consider to be valid information, or they're controlling the information online. In fact, they have tons of trolls. They pay people like that sometimes they do with like students, like that's like a little program they do, that they don't really see it as censorship. They see it as that they're helping eradicate anti-Semitism on the internet. One of the big groups that does that is the JIDF, which sounds like a just group that's protect Jewish people online, Jewish Internet Defense Force, but it is a thinly veiled Zionist front that is there to discredit critics of the Zionist state and other alternative media. So obviously Facebook has a lot of bias
Well,
People know
have you had
media.
to put your license online and send it to Facebook yet?
They haven't done that to me yet. They haven't
Yeah,
went as far as that.
so a lot of us that had more controversial sites had to do that. I had to give them my driver's license in order to recover my site, just to prove that I said who I said I was. And they have, and then there's also a company out there called Visible Technologies. They're a company that was built by the CIA. They were financed by the CIA to do surveillance monitoring and reporting on Facebook. The CIA has a venture capital arm called InQtel, and InQtel invests in technology companies, and one of the ones they invested in out of Seattle, Washington, is a company called Visible Technologies, and that company in particular does surveillance monitoring and reporting on Facebook for specific things like you said, pro-Palestinian, pro. Obviously, if you're going to be pro-ISIS or something like that, those would be things that they're looking for. And obviously, Mark Zuckerberg is very friendly with Shimon Peres. He's very friendly with, not as friendly, I should say, with Netanyahu, because Netanyahu would be considered sort of a right-wing Zionist, whereby, Zuckerberg is more of a soft-core left-wing Zionist. And, unfortunately, the Israel government has been heavily controlled by a more strong right-wing hardline government, and looks like it may stay under that control because the hardcore Zionists outnumber the softcore Zionists in that state. So, that being said, there is some benefit to at least the not that I'm a supporter of oppressive regimes, but if you're going to be under an oppressive regime, I would hope that it would be less violent and more considerate, and I would say that that's the only benefit when you're talking about the likes of maybe a Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept, or Peter Bernhardt from what does he write for now? The Daily Beast, and then obviously owners of the infrastructure, very much like the Sergey Brin from Google, and obviously Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook. So these are the the barriers in which people that are trying to speak out against these sort of oppressive or steering mindsets. These are what we're up against. Thank God, that it's not more oppressive and more controlling, because right now at least there's some way to get the word out. There is an opportunity. I don't know how your show is syndicated, but there is an opportunity to syndicate, through this medium and through other mediums. It looked like you and I had, ties to like Sean Raspatello and Jack Blood and those kind of guys who also do alternative radio networks like you, and it does reach people, and it does get out to a larger audience. I've had friends actually call me on in different parts of the country that were being Jack Blood's network was being rebroadcast out on some different radio networks across the country. So at least people were actually the story does get out to a different group of people every once in a while.
Yes, and Jack Blood, I'm pretty familiar with him. He's kind of closer, almost to like this, circle, the alternative media or whatnot. UCY, we have a decent, we do have a decent following, and the circle, the alternative media, we have some pretty big names over here. We have, of course, you might have heard of him, Chuck O'Celli, the famous
Sure,
JFK
like Chuck.
recently. Yeah, he was over here actually. Now he does it on a different network, but he was here for a long time. The Anti-Media, which, their giant Facebook following is based out of UCY. They're here 5 nights a week.
Nice.
So we have a few different bigger names here at the alternative media, and also we give some people that are just more like more of a softcore radio host. They're not really as big into journalism. It's just something they do once a week or whatnot, and they are able to get their opinions out there. Me, I'm kind of more actually I try kind of hard in order to try to get a bigger reach and audience, and have nice guests like I have you on here. I've had before people of many different backgrounds. I had like one of the Bundy occupiers here back in June.
Nice.
If you heard of him, Ray Lewis, the famous occupier, the former chief of police for Philadelphia. He was on the show one time.
Great guy, yeah.
Oh yeah, he was real interesting.
He was up in New York. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
That was a great show. That was before I was over here at UCY. I used to do off Blog Talk Radio on a station called Stable Radio. I think it was actually dedicated. The person that it wasn't, I didn't name it. The person who named it, I think, dedicated to Jack Blood because that's one of his things. He says, "Stay bold."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I like Jack. Jack's he's a good character. I got to tell you, some of the people that I have met in the alternative radio, most of them have been very legit, meaning, good meaning, wanting to do and say the right things and do the right things to help people understand what's going on there. And then unfortunately you've got the Alex Joneses of the world, which I got to tell you, the one thing that Alex Jones did do is he did inspire a lot of individuals to look a different direction. And, thankfully a lot of the people that did originally, learn from him because he was one of the earlier sort of alternative network, guys that got popularity. He inspired a lot of these guys, but a lot of these guys kind of looked at him like, whoa, geez, he's kind of out of his mind. But there still is some legitimacy to some of the things he did talk about versus some of the things he's been kind of got himself involved in as of lately. So I kind of see it as a more of a gift that he's at least grown the community of individuals who are willing to at least question the narrative in which we've all been taught our entire lives. And I was lucky enough to have a sort of a moment of clarity after serving eight years in the intelligence community, and that was having an inside track. It took me, until my late 20s, to kind of figure that out. And obviously there wasn't a lot of access to this information back in the late 80s and early 90s. The internet didn't exist. Yeah. And we had the Dewey Decimal System and you could go look at old newspapers on microfiche, for God's sakes, and that was, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff on the internet. And certainly through the late 90s, it started to pick up. And boy, I'll tell you, the last 10, 15 years, you just, the Library of Congress is at your fingertips. And unless you're, obviously it takes a massive amount of time, and people don't dedicate the right amount of time to getting the right information. And so they're victims to the information that's easily and readily available. And obviously, when they become disgruntled with it, they're like, well, I don't really get into that. It's just too convoluted, and I don't know what to believe. And I said, I don't blame you. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So, and it just, nobody really has the time to filter through it. So that's, until, you get somebody that's trustworthy out there. And, unfortunately, as you said earlier in the show, people have been so fooled for so long, and they're so ingrained in their beliefs that they have now, or so disillusioned that they're just not interested in hearing it. They just can't take it anymore. It's just,
well, it goes as far as even, like we're talking about, that even the alternative media, they have, I would say that's infiltration that's happened. And you have, people like Alex Jones that for, years talked about how the Democrats and Republicans work for the same people and that Wall Street owned both sides. Now you see him supporting the Republican candidate and then eventually the president. It's really weird, actually, to see Alex Jones defending the president and the government pretty much. And that's how it's going to be for at least the next 4 years was Alex Jones. And I used to like Alex Jones. I met about I was 15 years old.
Yeah. There's a lot of people. Yeah. I got to tell you, Alex Jones brought a lot of interesting people on. He but definitely made an impression that, and as crazy as he was. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's two things. He's a gate. He has a lot of people. He brought a lot of people into the whole alternative media sphere. But he's also been, in a way, he's a gatekeeper and kept a lot of people back from, really getting the true information on a lot of things and keeping people obsessed with some of a lot of nonsensical stuff. And at the same time, he's also made a lot of money off of what he's done. I mean, the guy is a millionaire, has made a lot of money off of. I think the two main products is the water filters and the male vitality pills, which I find that to be exceptionally hilarious. But I saw one thing that was it was a picture that was Donald Trump his new I think his new FDA head or something like that to fix the Flint water crisis, or no, the new expert on water filtration to fix the Flint water crisis, and it showed Alex Jones' water filters.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, Alex Jones he's done a misservice. And I would say that there's also, on the flip side, for the people that are more left-wing thinking, and we're starting to veer into the left-wing alternative media. One of the people that's kept a lot of people back was Cenk Uygur, and we saw that in this election. Cenk Uygur ultimately how corrupt the system is and how it oppresses a lot of people, but then he supports the ultimate face of the establishment, Hillary Clinton, during the election, and you have Alex Jones supporting Trump. And then they ultimately got into a little fight over there at the Republican National Convention. Also, you see Cenk Uygur. Actually, Alex Jones really didn't. Alex Jones came on a stage or whatnot and was kind of like starting to instigate stuff, and then Cenk Uygur gets off. Roger Stone's just in the back, kind of blabbing about or whatnot. That's the things that apparently Cenk Uygur really hates Roger Stone, who ran for Senate. Remember that he was going to run for Senate here in Florida. I don't think he actually made it on the ballot. Ultimately, we had Paul Stanton was the one that ran the Libertarian Party for 2016 for the Senate. And he got like 4% of the vote or something like that. And Rubio got his recoordination to be the senator over here. One of the ultimate establishment hacks and big-time supporter for wars overseas. I mean, he's the one that continues to push the hardline neocon narrative on Russia, talks about how we should do some kind of coup or something again in Venezuela. Remember, like they did in 2002, they tried to overthrow Chavez in a coup, and that didn't work out too well for them. And I don't think it would work. I for something like that, but some politicians still stick to that narrative, like that's the worst government ever, and we need to overthrow them. That came to being half Colombian and having been in Colombia. It always comes to a special interest to see the situation that's going on there, and over there in Venezuela, and what's happened over there, and how long that the United States has tried to provoke the deposal of Chavez, and now it's Maduro, and now probably next, I don't know, perhaps his vice president, if the recall successful, and bring about his vice president.
Right.
You look at the United States government, just the history for the last 40 years or so, 50 years in South America, regime change, coups, and all kinds of ugly stuff. And like you said, is that there's the big drug trade that's involved going across Central America or whatnot. What do you think is going to happen also? That's a good question. With Donald Trump and his tough line on Mexico, do you think the real question is ever going to get addressed, and that is Mexico's government, the United States government's collaboration with the drug cartels down there. What's been going on? It's one of the dirtiest secrets that the United States government doesn't like to admit to, but it's became pretty obvious, especially after Operation Fast and Furious got exposed.
Yeah.
That there is definitely a collaboration between the three forces.
Well, I think we're going to see, obviously, the Mexican government is pretty disillusioned by Trump. I mean, there's definitely not going to be a huge alliance in any near term. When it comes to the drug trade, certainly no wall is going to stop the Sonora drug trade from making it into the United States. And I saw one of the largest busts that came through recently in California was a remote-controlled submarine that was basically a submarine drone that was filled with cocaine coming into California. Now, they found that one, but if you can afford a remote-controlled submarine, I guarantee you a wall is not going to stop anybody. And the Mexican government and the U.S. government, whether or not they're involved or not involved, indirectly or directly, is going to be a moot point at that obviously individuals know how to do this, and they've been doing it for a long time. And I'd like to go back to what you were saying about the Young Turks guy. It was funny because I watched the same effects as the votes were coming in, and Hillary Clinton was slowly dying a slow death, and the birth of Trump was being revealed. These guys on the Young Turks network were basically losing their minds, and it shouldn't surprise anybody. As much as I agree with you, Cenk Uygur was a good sort of avenue to learn some things. He definitely came from the when you look at current TV. I don't know if you know the history, but current TV was actually acquired by Qatar. Al Jazeera paid basically 4 times the going price to create Al Jazeera America and get on American cable networks using the current TV infrastructure that was, by the way, owned partly by what's the guy, Al Gore. Al Gore actually profited from that sale to Qatar. So, and Keith Olbermann was the guy, the head of the news before Cenk Uygur came in. So, and Keith Olbermann obviously moved over to his MSNBC seat before he was eventually fired for his craziness. But, the fact is that, these guys all were on the side of the left wing, and certainly, the Young Turks network has exposed itself as being pretty much a lot less legitimate than anybody has ever, taken on. He's claiming that he's progressive, but he certainly wasn't very happy when Hillary Clinton was losing. I was happy that she was losing, but I certainly wasn't happy that Trump was winning either. So, it's that kind of shows you legitimacy is now that Trump has won. I'm learning more and more about some of the connections that I had on Facebook, just about how anti-Clinton that they and Obama that they were, but yet I didn't realize how pro-Republican and people would have said that I was actually pro-Trump, only because the few things that Trump would say that made sense I would actually post. And I certainly was no supporter of Hillary Clinton. And I said, Hillary Clinton was the war criminal we knew. Trump would be the war criminal we learn about. And certainly that's not taken much time to learn that he's had no interest in slowing down what's going on in the current countries. He certainly played his cards straight out when he chose the 7 countries that he's implemented the ban on. So, fact is, you were absolutely right. Cenk Uygur has gone completely left, and Alex Jones has gone completely right and not legitimate. And hopefully we can get another current TV out there and not sell out. That's the thing, is that current TV was one of the few television networks that actually made it to cable and wasn't that corrupt in the beginning. And it's kind of the way CNN was when it first came out long time ago, if you can remember that.
Well, that was like in the 1980s, so no, I don't remember that. I was not born for about another 15 years, I don't think. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, but my audience sure does, is that I'm only 18. I've been doing the radio for about 3 years now, and I started when I was 15, the radio.
Oh, great. Good for you.
Yeah. I'm one of the younger faces here at UCYMA and the alternative media in general. But
doing a great job.
I've been... Yeah, I mean, I sometimes I think to myself, like, damn, I've had a lot of... I've had a decent amount of guests, and all before, a lot of them before I even turned 18. But yeah, we do need another. I would say in some ways, maybe we do need a face. We need a big network or something like that, or maybe not a media network, but just a big alternative media network that we can all sort of look to. I tell people that you just kind of have to look around, and I'd say don't completely rely on RT, Press TV, but they are very good sources to get a general scope of what is going on today.
There's some sources, but there's articles that are being published, and I think they're strategic. These Russia's being very strategic at trying to be as supportive as possible of Trump at the moment, and I think part of that is due to the fact that from a geopolitical perspective, they're trying to gain as much as much friendship with the United States as possible right now, because obviously there was absolutely no chance of doing that under Clinton. It's the same thing that the U.S. government did with Yeltsin and Gorbachev, and obviously, the U.S. took advantage of those relationships and did not look out for the interests of the Russians. They actually took advantage of them in a way that was very it was very unhealthy for the Russian economy, unhealthy for the Russian people. Do I think that the Russians could do that to Trump, to the United States? Well, probably not, because they don't have the economic influences that the United States has to do those kind of investments. Would that be beneficial to a group like let's say Scott, Chris, and the Jack Bloods and those kind of individuals who are trying to build up a network? Sure, I'd love to see an opportunity for international investment in a U.S. television network like Qatar did for Al Jazeera America. That'd be fantastic. If it happened from Russia or Iran or from China, we would all be painted as some sort of global terrorist network, unfortunately. But because unfortunately, yeah, that would happen. I mean, because that's the mentality that they would use on that. Obviously, when it's coming from Qatar, well, that seems to be okay. Even though Qatar is obviously a Western petroleum monarchy that absolutely is got some issues with their mistreatment of women and so on and so forth. They don't have the same ideas on that we have. By the way, that I should say that the West has, in most cases. Obviously not everybody in the West treats their wives and children the same way. And let's also be clear that this hasn't been going on very long here, because if you go back about 100 or more years, their women couldn't even vote. Certainly everybody had slaves still in the 1800s before the war, and then certainly prior to that, the indigenous people in the United States.
Everyone. It was a very small, unfortunately, it happened, but it should be mentioned that it really wasn't, in a way, you look at it, it was a partially a class problem. You had these people rich, being able to buy people.
Right. Well, at the same time, though, when you look at it, it was only 100 years ago here. So, to expect other countries to, basically adopt our, humanitarian, improvements overnight is not fair to those countries. Why should they have to evolve, in at the same rate that we evolved, when in fact 100 years ago we were definitely guilty of the same crimes that are going on in their country. So I think that whole mentality of they call it spreading democracy is just a tremendous hypocrisy. You can't not force your way of life on other people, and they'll evolve in their own time, and certainly. You get a lot more with sugar than you do with salt. You can't bomb them into democracy, and that's unfortunate that's the approach that we're taking. And there's 75 million people in Iran that would absolutely not want to be bombed into democracy, and they certainly aren't looking forward to that kind of democracy.
Yeah, and again, it would be the Western definition of democracy. What's to say that they have elections, they have freedom of expression, they have a democracy already, but it's not an American-style democracy. So they're going to be the United States is going to call them a dictatorship, but they call Iran a dictatorship. It is a partial. What I would say it is it's a semi-dictatorship, semi-democracy. True that the Ayatollahs do not leave, the supreme leader stays in power, but they do pick a different president, which does heavily change their approach on a lot of different things. For example, when they went from Haja Ahmadinejad to Rouhani, their stance towards the West definitely heavily moderated compared to Haja Ahmadinejad, and I think they, in some ways, they need somebody like that, what they had before, because I don't think they can play soft.
Well, I mean, Ahmadinejad was obviously, this is a young guy who was, very disenfranchised with the West, who very much understood, the impact that the Shah and the Americans had on his society, and he was probably, they would consider me militant in the United States. I would be considered a militant, even though I don't do anything physically wrong. I'm not breaking any laws or breaking any windows or doing anything, going out and protesting violence. Ahmadinejad would be considered a militant just by the nature of his speaking out against the American involvements and the Israeli involvements in oppressive activities. Now, obviously Khomeini is far more intelligent and more poised. It'd be like comparing sort of Ronald Reagan to Dan Quayle. It's an insult actually to Ahmadinejad, but that's the idea, is that Dan Quayle obviously wasn't very eloquent. Well, Biden, for example, there's another one, Joe Biden. There's a guy who puts his foot in his mouth all the time as well. And once again, Joe Biden would be an insult to Ahmadinejad in my book as well. So
a lot of American politicians would be an insult to both of those two.
But not a lot of Americans would agree with us. A lot of Americans would say, "Oh, you don't know anything. He's a terrorist. He wanted to destroy Israel." He says, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I see that you've been watching TV lately." So that's unfortunate. Is that you and I can have this discussion, in our echo chamber, or with your, obviously I shouldn't say that, because with your your audience, but unfortunately, the majority of Americans know Iran to be this horrible place that just wants to destroy the West, and that's the mentality. They've gotten their history from Hollywood. They believe Sally Fields and Not Without My Daughter, and they believe in Argo, and they believe in Rosewater, and they believe in all these films that have shaped their thoughts and minds about what's happening in Iran. And sadly, they have absolutely no idea. They couldn't. Most of them couldn't pick Iran out on a global map. So that's.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it is. That's how it is, unfortunately. Well, we got just about 45 seconds left before we hit the music outro. So I'm going to thank you, Scott, for coming on my show. It was a pleasure having you on. And I think the word of today that definitely, or a term of today that definitely comes to the show is that cognitive dissonance. That's unfortunately a lot of Americans are caught in that. And this show and alternative media, we're trying to snap you out of it. be caught in your own reality. Try to get to the real reality.
Well, although you are only 18, let's have a beer when we get a chance to get together.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
The point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return. And if I back down